The official history is that this was San Antonio's first neighborhood or settlement, which is not quite true. The first neighborhood was the Villa de San Fernando around the Plaza de las Islas, main plaza, but this area was used to house soldiers for the Presidio and later for the Alamo. So the Spanish soldiers and their family lived in, fairly crude huts in this neighborhood. In 1819, there was a flood, and people started moving up to higher ground, and so there started to be more and more settlement in this area. And later on in the 1840s, when the German immigrants started coming in, along with the French, the Swiss, and later Mexicans, they started filling in. And that's part of the charm, is the structures here are, represent architecture of many nationalities. By the Depression era, by the early 1900s, this had fallen into great disrepair, and it was something of a slum. A lot of these structures were removed, fallen down, and whatnot. And so Mayor Maury Maverick, who was elected in 1939, made it his mission to restore this area.
Nancy, could you tell us a little bit about Maury Maverick's role in the restoration of La Villita?
Yes, I can. Mayor Maverick's dream was to restore La Villita. It was a multi-fold desire. Number one was to restore a historic neighborhood. Number two was to provide jobs. We're in the middle, pre-war era, but post-depression. And number three, he wanted to create a spirit of Pan-Americanism and to promote world peace. Now, how can you do that in La Villita? But he named, for example, we have a bust of Juarez. This is called Juarez Plaza. We have Bolivar Hall. We have Hidalgo Street. So he named them after heroes of Meso or Middle and Central and South America. And I think he accomplished his purpose. He hired O'Neill Ford, very well-known architect who was living in Austin at the time, to help with the restoration. But O'Neill Ford was an artist and Maury Maverick was a pragmatist, and they clashed heads, and unfortunately that relationship didn't last for more than a year or two. But O'Neill Ford, his dream was to see this again, to set a mood, not for total restoration, because so many of the buildings had been compromised by that time, their integrity had been compromised. So he wanted to reconstruct them as best he could, but he wanted to create a mood or an ambience rather than a perfect restoration. This house is called the Major Jeremiah DeShiel House. It was built in approximately 1850 by the contractor was a Campman, and the Campman family is still very prominent in San Antonio today. The society purchased it in 1942, and of course, so this, is another proof of our long involvement in La Villita. It has been extensively restored, but actually Preservation Action, which is a national lobbying organization for preservation in the United States, was founded on this property in 1974. Well, this is the house that belonged to General Martin Perfecto Cos, who was a general, of course, in the Mexican Army. It was here that he surrendered to the Texans in 1835. This is probably the oldest extant structure in La Villita right now, and the society has been instrumental in reconstructing and preserving this structure. We paid for the new roof, we paid for doors, and quite a few other structural elements. The Gresser House, or the Gresser-Futrell House, was built sometime between 1860 and 1873. It was bought by the Gressers in 1860. There was an existing structure at the corner, and then the structure we are currently in was added later on. It's, I don't know, it's thought that Jack Hayes, the great Texas Ranger, lived in that house at one time. It currently is the headquarters for A Night in Old San Antonio. It's where we conduct our business year-round to plan our 20 hours of frivolity every April.
Could you tell us a little bit about how NIOSA started, its history, and its affiliation with the San Antonio Conservation Society?
I'd be delighted to. One of our founders and early members and presidents of the San Antonio Conservation Society, Ethel Harris, lived at San Jose Mission and was actually very instrumental in the restoration of San Jose, and she also established the pottery at San Jose Mission, and her tiles are now world famous. She started an Indian Harvest Festival in the fall of 1936, and unfortunately it was rained out the first year. but the second year was a success. She started it not so much as a fundraiser, but to celebrate San Antonio's fiesta spirit and the traditions of San Antonio. The Indian Festival moved to the banks of the San Antonio River in 1940, and together with the Daughters of the Republic of Texas, the San Antonio Conservation Society co-sponsored a turkey supper. Proceeds were $800, half of which were donated to the restoration of La Villita. So the Society has been proactive since the early days in the restoration of La Villita and the preservation of this, wonderful historic district. In 1946, I believe, the city asked that the Society present a night in Old San Antonio in La Villita, and in 1948, our first night in Old San Antonio, as it is now known, was born in La Villita. It was one night. It increased gradually until it came to be held over the 4 nights, which it is now, in the 1950s, I believe. And our proceeds have increased from $375 to over $3 million in the 60 years that we've been holding NIOSA.
Question, why doesn't NIOSA allow marketing on its grounds during the event?
Well, NIOSA has maintained and retained its same flavor, although it's gotten bigger and bigger through the years. Our focus is to celebrate and show the wonderful ethnic and cultural heritage of San Antonio. And I think by commercializing it and having commercial sponsors, we would take away from some of its cultural and charming heritage.